My name is Jarvis Haupt. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering, and I'm serving as the moderator for today's webinar. So let me first say thank you to the Data Science Initiative for organizing this. This is part of the AI in Higher Education webinar series. And I will introduce, thank you, I just got the feedback, so it looks like the person who asked can hear me, so hopefully the rest of you can hear me as well. So it's my pleasure today to introduce you to this webinar. The title is going to be Writing Instructors Share Their Experiences with Generative AI. It's a panel discussion with Professor Leanne Kasman-Breuch and her research team. So maybe just a little bit of background from my perspective. I know a lot of us are familiar with generative AI and the tools that come with it, and have probably most or maybe all of us at this point have dabbled with this for applications within our own kind of academic sphere. Today, Professor Breuch and her team are going to talk about their study where undergraduate students were using things like ChatGPT in their academic writing process. So without further ado, I'll hand it off to Professor Breuch, and we're very excited to hear what you can tell us about this, because I think we're all very curious to know how this fits in the grand scheme circa 2025. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen here to start. Is this showing up? Showing up okay? Okay,
yes.
Great. Well, thanks again. Thank you to the Data Science Initiative. My name is Leanne Kasman-Breuch. I'm a professor in the Writing Studies Department, currently also serving as Associate Dean for Undergraduate Education in the College of Liberal Arts. And I'm so happy to be here with the research team I've been working with for the last 2 years. That includes Stuart, Jess, Osmi, Allison, and Kathleen. Each of them we will be sharing some of our insights on a study that we conducted. It's been 2 years ago now, actually, but we are all scholars and teachers of writing and teaching writing classes. So we have a lot of insights to share in this presentation. This is a quick overview of our discussion, and we will be leaving some time for Q&A at the end, but if you do have some questions throughout, feel free to put them in the chat. We will provide first a review of our 2023 study of undergraduate student perceptions of ChatGPT. We were focusing on ChatGPT when it was pretty new for students in the writing classroom, so we'll share with you that study. Then, being 2 years later, new insights from writing instructors, from all of us here about generative AI, and some takeaways that you might find useful as you're thinking about a generative AI in the classrooms. And then we'll follow up with questions and discussion. So first, to start, I'll give an overview of the study, and our panelists will join in here. And as they join in, I've asked them to introduce themselves as they share their slides as well. But you'll see us going in and out and kind of trading slides here as we go through. First, a study description. So 2 years ago, we did a study completely virtually with ChatGPT, and we had 33 undergraduate students from across the university. They were from different colleges and different majors. We invited students to participate in what we would call a usability or a contextual inquiry study, in which we were sharing our screen. So it was conducted completely virtually, and we asked students to interact with ChatGPT. And then we had them read the output of ChatGPT and ask them to rate ChatGPT and ask them to reflect on their experiences. So our guiding question for this study was, how are undergraduate students understanding ChatGPT as an academic writing tool? And notice we were focusing on writing here, since we were all coming from a writing studies perspective, and we're teaching classes in writing. And so we were wondering how students were perceiving this tool. And at the time, it was somewhat new. If you remember 2022, it really made a splash. And then I would say about half of the students participating in the study had never interacted with ChatGPT before. That would be a different context now, but that was the context in 2023. And the squares on the bottom of the slide here, you can see there are 4 major parts of method collection. We gave them a background questionnaire. We gave them 5 ChatGPT tasks. Product reaction cards is a name for a usability technique where we ask students to describe their experience using different adjectives, the top 5 that they would use to describe what they experienced. And then we had a debriefing interview. This slide is just a screenshot of ChatGPT in April 2023, 2 years ago, and then what we see today in 2025. And I realize that you can't read them, but it gives a little sense of a couple of things that might be different. If you see the red square in the 2023 screenshot, that's the prompt that was entered. And in the right, the 2025 screen share, you see the prompt show up in the top right corner. Also, in the 2023 screenshot, the green square shows the output of ChatGPT, how it answered the prompt, and that's showing up in the 2025 down lower. And there's a little paragraph at the top in which ChatGPT is commenting, saying, sure, I can, here's a sample literacy narrative, which is a personal story. And there's a little introduction that ChatGPT is responding before the output. So just a little bit of context on the 2 years difference there. This is a description of the prompts that we gave students in the study. We gave all of the students the same prompts, and we had them screen share with us. So they were using ChatGPT, and we had them enter these prompts verbatim. And then we had them watch the output, ChatGPT answer these prompts one by one. We had them read the output and rate the output, and we gave them these questions for each text. How well did this ChatGPT text meet your expectations on a scale of 1 to 5? How likely would you be to use this text unaltered as your academic homework? And that was a question we had on our minds as writing teachers. How likely would you be to use this ChatGPT text to generate ideas about organization or something that you might write for a future draft? How satisfied are you with the text? How do you rate the credibility of the text and the relevance of the ChatGPT texts? So those were questions that we gave, and we had some other interview questions as well. Moving to the results, I'll give a quick overview, and then our panelists will jump in to share some of those results. So we want to share with you, there are many, many things we could talk about, but we're going to focus on these things. We'll share some first impressions that we noticed from students. Again, many students were new to ChatGPT at the time, and how they were thinking about ChatGPT, about process, writing process over product. We also coded their comments into 8 different categories or filters, and so you'll hear more about that. And how student comments varied depending on the circumstance in which they were using ChatGPT and their major, and also some critiques of credibility and how the critique was really important for our study. So I think I am sharing this now with Kathleen.
Thank you, Leanne. Yes, hi, I'm Kathleen Bolander. Very excited to be here with you today. In our test, we had students think out loud. We asked them to verbalize their thoughts as they were watching ChatGPT work. And here we have a collection of some of what students were saying. In the first, we see, oh, it's super fast. And in this middle one, it's referring specifically to prompt number 3, where they had ChatGPT provide a list of best practices. And the student said, I expected it to go to 10 bullet points, but it stopped at 9. And the next, I would look up more information on the people it mentions. And below, I think this looks like a list from Intro to Writing that the U gives. And finally, again, it's moving really fast. And then in the next slide, awesome. We also asked students to rate their expectations and how satisfied they were with the outputs. And you'll see here in our two graphs, students said ChatGPT texts more or less met their expectations, and they were more satisfied than not. And you'll see the graphs are tracking to the different prompts that we asked them to put into ChatGPT and the outputs that they read. So you can see how it kind of shifted based off of those texts and those outputs. But overall, this is the results that we found for their expectations and their satisfaction. And then we also had a section of the last portion of the study where students were given the opportunity to ask questions about ChatGPT or just to ChatGPT without typing it in, just kind of out loud speaking their thoughts and questions. And the questions really ranged widely. We had, how does it work? What does this mean for the future of education? How does it pull from the internet? What can't it do? What does this mean for research? How much more advanced will this be in a couple years? What does this mean about plagiarism? Is it accessible? Is it free? Where is the information coming from? Will it be, or will it get overused? What are its limits? Does it have different levels of writing? What biases does it have? Can the university tell if a text is written by ChatGPT or by a human? And does it generate a different response for everyone? So even at this time, students were critically thinking and questioning ChatGPT and its uses.
So then one thing that we really noticed is students told us that they were less likely to use ChatGPT text unaltered as opposed to generating ideas. And so students said they were more likely to use it as a brainstorming companion than to have it, let's say, to generate an entire history essay for their class or something like that. They're more likely to use it to as part of their writing process, where they might get an idea or a structure for their argument, and then use that to develop the work further. And we kind of tying into this idea of process over product, students were concerned about plagiarism and the vagueness of the generated text. They were concerned about citational practices and information accuracy. And then again, students generally would not use the text unaltered, but they wanted to use it to brainstorm, and they saw that it was useful for this. And then one limitation of our study design was that students weren't able to follow up within ChatGPT. And this was something that they brought up unprompted. Hey, I'd love to, if I was doing this in real life, I'd be asking follow-up questions. And within ChatGPT, or I'm taking the information that I'm learning and I'm taking it to Google or the library or something else. In general, students found that there was a lot of usefulness for it in terms of thinking through the structure. And so one framing mechanism that we use to kind of think about this is ChatGPT as the co-pilot. So the student is still in charge, right? But they sort of have the generative AI next to them, sort of helping out. And I've included here a picture of GitHub Copilot and a product that's on the market, wherein we really see that, and we think it's likely that students use ChatGPT in sophisticated, complicated ways that are going to change and develop over time, and as students change and develop over time as writers and thinkers.
Hi, I'm Allison Albright, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the 8 filters that we wound up kind of categorizing student comments in. So students have a lot of thoughts about ChatGPT, and we were wondering kind of what were the kind of lenses or filters that they were using when analyzing the text from ChatGPT or when talking about their experience with ChatGPT. So I'll just list them here. Low order concerns did come up quite a bit, where students were curious about grammar or spelling, kind of those surface level writing features that they may want some support with. They were also thinking about logic and organization and how AI did a good or not so good job at creating an argument that was believable, persuasive, or clear. Process also came up. Students commented where and when in the writing process they may use ChatGPT or how they saw it integrating or not integrating well. Information literacy, like the questions that KR was talking about, there are lots of questions that students had about where information is coming from, if that information is accurate, and so in some cases checking it against their own understanding of like a subject or genre that they're writing in. Relatedly, ethics came up. Students were concerned about either getting caught using AI or what it meant for kind of the quality of their education. A few students were then also wondering, like, where is this information coming from, ethically speaking? Like, whose information are we looking at? Self and experience was an interesting filter where students would think about their own experiences with writing or their identity in the world and how that identity was helping them understand or critique the texts that ChatGPT was producing. So kind of using those backgrounds to evaluate whether or not the text was useful or not so useful for them. Circumstance, in writing studies, we might also call this rhetorical situation, but the context that students were going to be using ChatGPT mattered. We intentionally included prompts for students to work through that were from a variety of contexts, from research to personal narratives. And students oftentimes would comment on how that context influenced whether or not they would use the text or how they were evaluating the text. And then finally, function. Students were also just curious at the nuts and bolts or the programming behind how ChatGPT worked. If we go to the next slide, we'll see kind of the frequency that these filters popped up. So our top 4 that students were using to kind of understand the text or evaluate the text were process, information literacy, low order concerns, and self and experience. So students were using like a combination of understanding of like spelling and grammar, their writing process, and their own identities most frequently.
Hi, I'm Jess Rumchek, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the circumstance as filter. So as Allison showed on the previous slide, circumstance as filter was not one of the top 4 filters that they were using, but we thought that those who did use this filter, what they were providing us with was really interesting to understand when and why they were reasoning as to how they would use it. So they were using it or considering their circumstances in many different ways. They were thinking about their own majors and own knowledge in terms of how they would use it. So students were, if they had a text that was similar to something that they had done previously or done in their major, they were more likely to critique it based on their previous knowledge. So if they were doing a lab report or something in seeing that in ChatGPT, they were more likely to point out things that they thought aligned with that genre or did not, based on their own experience. Students also expressed reluctance to use ChatGPT for their own major classes, but were more inclined to say they would feel comfortable using it for elective classes or outside their major classes, sometimes calling assignments in these classes busy work. Students were also more inclined to say that under certain time constraints, they'd be more likely to use it. So if they procrastinated and had to turn in an assignment the next day, they might be more likely to use it. And students were also more likely to say they would use it if it was for an assignment that they considered low stakes. So maybe not for a final project, but maybe for a discussion post or something. So understanding all these different circumstances could definitely help inform how we're looking at how our classes are structured and the assignments that we're providing to them. So on this slide, these are just some quotes from students showing in their words how they were reasoning. So I'll just pull out a couple of them. One student said, I guess if I was really, really hard pressed, I would use this, but I do feel like given about 15 to 20 minutes, I could write a better essay than this. So kind of saying that if they are really under a time constraint, they might consider using it, but still saying that they think they could do a better job. Another student saying, because if this is the last resort, I'd throw it in there and I probably still get like a C minus maybe, but it's really not that good. But for a discussion post, this would be good enough. So it just depends really what the assignment is. So students were really kind of more inclined to use it for a discussion post or a low stake assignment. Many students were bringing up these low stake assignments or summaries that they would be more likely to use it in.
Hi everyone, I'm Asmita Khimire. I am going to talk a little bit about credibility, critical AI literacy, and policy issues in regard to ChatGPT. So when talking about credibility, one of the question that we asked with our students was in regard to credibility of using ChatGPT. Relevance was the second question, and how likely are they going to use ChatGPT? We found that students feel less assuring and less credible when they are, or if they are asked to use ChatGPT. So credibility was one of the less rated stuff in ChatGPT. This finding is also confirmed by debriefing question that we asked in the last of the session, where we had a question like, what is the final question that you have in regard to ChatGPT? And most of the students asked question in regard to how the machine actually works, or if the sources they are citing are credible or not. We are ready to jump on to the next slide, Leanne. So when talking about credibility, and these are two of the kind of opinion that students shared with us. I'm going to read them aloud for you all. Credibility really is a tough, but it's mostly about inclusion of sources. You need to prove to me that it's real. I don't feel that way until the last prompt, but I could not trust it. The second opinion shared by students are, what you asked about credibility was interesting. I wonder what kind of database it is pulling from, because I don't know anything about credibility or of it or where it gets its information. I just saw that it had relevant and accurate information. I want to know is what I want to know, what I would want to know is, it always accurate? Are there instances where it gave wrong answer? So it's one of the surprising as well as reassuring finding for us. It's surprising because we learned that students already have a kind of a critical literacy in regard to ChatGPT. And it's reassuring also because at the time when we're doing this usability testing, it was a period when there was like hype and havoc, also like both sides of a spectrum in regard to ChatGPT. We find it really interesting that students are bringing critical literacy into the system, or well, they are using the ChatGPT. So this brings us to talk about one of the really widely raised concern in terms of literacy, especially by the scholars and practitioners in writing studies and technical communication who are advocating for critical AI literacy. So for us, critical AI literacy is, can we go on to next slide? Critical AI literacy is a competency that enable students or individuals to critically evaluate AI technology and use AI as a tool in online or at home. So this brings us to talk about, like the development in a literacy or in writing studies where we come to know that one of the skills or one among various skills that the students need or want to know more is how machine learning works and where it draws its sources from.
Okay, thank you. And now, so we've shared our study with you and some of the results, and we'd like to share some reflections about what we're learning since then, since 2023. Again, ChatGPT was pretty new for many of the students that we were talking with. And this slide is just a preview. And again, we'll share with have our panelists speak to these things. But we're going to share some things about what is different now, 2 years later. And I think I'll go right to the next slide and to Kathleen.
Yes, so as Leanne said, our study took place 2 years ago. We definitely recognize that ChatGPT has changed a lot. In our usability test, we were using version 3.5, and students were definitely impressed by the speed, but they had questions about that citation again, and like the lack of clarity around the sources. In today, now in April, ChatGPT is on version 4. On the 16th, it released 0.3 and 0.4 mini. And there's just a recognizably better incorporation of citations and sources since our test back in 2023. And a release that they sent out recently about their version of ChatGPT, quote, reasoning models can agentically use and combine every tool within ChatGPT. This includes searching the web, analyzing, uploading files and other data with Python, reasoning deeply about visual inputs, and even generating images.
And one thing that I've been tracking closely, Leanne, if you want to play that short video with no sound. One thing that I've been tracking closely is the improvements in deep research techniques, wherein basically you can ask a generative AI tool to do research for you, and it indexes and looks at websites and verified sources and journal articles, and then creates a research report for you. It takes a little bit longer than just typing a response and getting something back instantly, but it's much higher quality, and then it provides you at the end with validation, the sources that it actually drew from in creating the text for you. And so this is something that I've been monitoring closely. So OpenAI sent me an email a few weeks ago that was like, hey, I see that you're a student. All students can get free access to ChatGPT Pro, which includes deep research from now until the end of the semester. Get the head start that you need on your final reports and term papers and stuff. So I'm going to continue to monitor this deep research and improvements there.
Yeah, like Stuart was saying, we as teachers have become kind of monitors of these evolving technologies. And one important kind of change that I've been noticing as a teacher of writing since that 2023 study is that I feel like my identity as a teacher and my students' identities as students has kind of been reshaped. Our relationship maybe feels or looks a little bit different, in part because of policies from the university and our own interaction with AI tools. So the first thing I want to note is this is something that has happened before with the kind of introduction of email, typewriters, word processors. These were also kind of technologies that changed the relationship between students and teachers and made us kind of rethink our position. So right now with AI, I'm feeling myself as a teacher perhaps falling into a role that's like policing and catching AI infractions, which at least for me is a job that I don't super want and I'm not well equipped to do because, you know, I'm introduced to these technologies new too. And on the flip side, students are maybe seen as machines for producing papers or test scores, or, you know, these possible, almost in some languages, like criminals who might be using AI to like cheat or plagiarize. And writing is the site of this possible infraction. So it's kind of I don't know, unstable time when we're thinking about who we are as educators and learners. And I really loved a panel at the Minnesota Writing Educators Conference I attended where undergraduate students shared and challenged the notion of a transactional relationship in education, that we are giving something and students are taking, and thinking about how even with AI, we can continue to question, well, what is our role as a teacher? What is the role of a student? And what is the role of writing in education overall? These are things I think both students and teachers are grappling with, and hopefully at the end, some of our takeaways start to grapple with as well.
Hi again. Of course, the relationship between students and teachers have become more strange because we are enforced to take a monitoring role or monitoring actors or actant in diverse kind of ways. Another challenge that we are seeing or observing since our research is there are diverse policies in classroom and in schools in regard to ChatGPT. And those policies are disconnected with one another. Because of this, there are the situation or the events where more marginalized students, for example, the students who speak more than one language, bilingual and multilingual students, the students who doesn't look white, or students who are from other countries, such as international students, are more affected because of the ChatGPT uses or not uses. It's because there are the events where students write more nice essay or articles or assignment. It's more likely that international students or students who are from bilingual or multilingual backgrounds are accused of doing so more than the privileged students. So I titled this as a ripple effect of ChatGPT uses or non-uses in the classroom. There are also the events where international students in one cases were deported because of the uses of ChatGPT. Well, of course, there is more layers to that, but the international issues and transnational policies are deeply connected with the uses of ChatGPT in the classroom. With these two figures, I actually use ChatGPT to draw this figure. I draw the prototype of these figures and asked it to reiterate 2 times. And this was the first one, is like with the arrow here. And second prompt was like, can you make the arrow in different direction? And then, well, it didn't do perfectly, but yeah, I used ChatGPT for drawing this figure. And one of the direction that I'm taking in my research is how to center bilingual, multilingual, and international students while using ChatGPT in the classroom. arrived with this idea, and I recently published a paper on computers and composition out of the experience of working in the team. And my analysis or my findings are, of course, we cannot deny the ChatGPT or deny AI or Gen AI in the classroom, but we have to learn how to center international, multilingual, bilingual students' experience as well as writing habits when using ChatGPT, or have to develop the clear parameters in terms of when to use ChatGPT, how to report when using ChatGPT.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about student perspectives on it as it progressed and how we can think more critically about what we're doing in our classrooms. So I try to bring in multiple conversations throughout the semester about AI and ChatGPT. And it really seems like students are interested in having the conversations around ethical implications. They are thinking about ethical considerations, but at the same time, they are still using it. I've also tried to bring in activities and lessons that encourage these critical AI discussions, such as focusing on our projects. And for instance, if I'm doing a proposal, I will show them examples of proposals and show them an example of a proposal that ChatGPT created. And we kind of go through it and talk about like what's missing, what is good or bad about it, how it can be evaluated against the criteria that I'm using in the classroom to kind of show them why it isn't really the best to use something that ChatGPT produced. I'm also really thinking critically about learning goals in the classroom. So this goes back to what Allison said, is what is the role of writing in education? And I think although it's challenging, it just gives us a really great opportunity to rethink what we really want students to be able to learn, the thinking skills, the abilities, and how we can shift assignments and even curriculum to reach these goals. So I've, for example, instead of doing a lot of discussion posts, because I know they're using ChatGPT for the discussion posts, I've been doing more analytical work and having them analyze text and find arguments and go through genres and doing an approach to look at writing from that perspective. I also have switched up my final project and did something that wasn't really a traditional project to see if that works. So I think, again, it is a really challenging time, but it gives us this chance to be really innovative and think of new ways that we can shift education in this landscape.
Thank you, team. And now we're going to wrap up in the next few minutes here with just some takeaways as we think about generative AI and critical AI literacy. A lot of the discussions our team has had have focused around developing a critical AI literacy. And we also have some suggestions here that each of us will discuss again. So starting with critical AI literacy, our work has led us into thinking about pedagogy that encourages students to ask critical questions about the accuracy of information they're getting from generative AI, the degree of bias, and privacy and uses of information, especially if people enter their own information into generative AI, and then what happens to that ownership and how is that fueling additional searches and information. The quote on the bottom is from a chapter that we've been invited to write about our experience with generative AI. And what we're saying here, adopting an ethical framework in relation to ChatGPT might really mean working to understand the technology and its capabilities while openly acknowledging the ways its use requires scrutiny and verification. And so we've been trying to outline some ways to do that. If a critical concept and the activities on the left here on the table, then there's some suggestions on the right. So facilitating the writing process, we can use generative AI to generate ideas or develop ideas or create outlines. If we want to check the accuracy of information, which is a critical activity, we can check the citations included in ChatGPT text. We actually had quite a few quotes from students about doing that's very time consuming, but maybe a necessary activity, or fact checking, things that generative AI produces. And in writing studies, we think a lot about considering the integrity of a text. And so evaluating the quality of texts produced, and some of our panelists were talking about that, and learning how to cite aspects of a paper that have been created with ChatGPT or other generative AI programs. These are some ideas to help students learn more. And I think I'm passing this along. I'm not sure who I'm passing this slide along to. Allison, okay.
Hi. Yeah, so thinking about critical AI literacy, and alongside that, I've also been thinking about why it is that students have shared with me in my own classrooms why they use AI. And beyond just being like something to get out of busy work, which we did see some of, students were using AI for complex reasons that have led me to rethink my role as an educator while creating kind of projects and opportunities for practicing skills. So AI tools are oftentimes marketed with an ethos of productivity and efficiency, which can be really appealing to students for whom, time is a precious resource. They work jobs, they have families, they have many classes and responsibilities. So I see it as our job to perhaps explain why the time they spend on a process using like their brain versus a computer brain matters, and similarly, why that activity is important overall, so it can help them understand when and why AI might be appropriate or not appropriate while working on those activities. Students have also shared that they use it as a tool to get unstuck and to decrease the distress around uncertainty, or the distress they feel when they don't know what to do. So perhaps part of our job when creating activities or spaces for students to learn is to support students going through some of these more emotional aspects of writing and learning, because they are emotional processes. So making sure that we create a tolerance for that kind of distress can be helpful. And then finally, students are oftentimes evaluating ethical considerations and their professional outlook. So what job might they have, and will it require them to use AI? So I see my job as an educator to be to consider how and where AI will be used or factor into future jobs. I teach a business writing course, for example, and oftentimes students will say, well, I'll just use AI for that. So it is my job to be on top of like how our industry is using these tools or not using them, and to have discussions with our students about values by having kind of a foundation of values that they care about in their writing, in their work, in their interactions. It can help them identify when and where to use AI, or perhaps not to use it at all because of the values that they hold. So those are a few things that I've been thinking about while talking to students.
And my takeaway here is geared more toward instructors, and myself definitely included. I've provided a lot of references and resources to go forth and explore with around this idea of just clarifying policies, instructions, and expectations when factoring in AI usage or the not usage of it. Thinking of Brene Brown's Clear is Kind, and just how important providing that clarity for students can be. If you don't want them to use something in an assignment, to really spell that out, to ensure that your policies line up well with what you are telling your students, is obviously just going to be super helpful. And I work a lot with students in a one-on-one capacity in a different position that I have in addition to instructing, and just having that clarity there can be so helpful, even in just those conversations with students if they're getting tutoring or something, to know how best to support and continue to help them as they move forward with different assignments.
So there's a lot of really complex ethical concerns about ChatGPT and ChatGPT in the classroom that we are really thinking through, but don't really have great answers to. So we're really pondering, is there even ethical ChatGPT use? Is that really a thing? We're thinking about our responsibility as educators and what the effect of ChatGPT is having on students. So we know writing isn't just about producing a deliverable. It has a lot of benefits for critical thinking skills and reasoning skills and fostering all of these abilities that students really need to be out in a complex world. So how can we grapple with this, but also at the same time thinking about the fact that it is so widely used in industry and they know that, and it's just increasing. So how do we hold that with the need to prepare them to ethically use it in industry? And Stuart's going to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and so I've been working in industry for about the past 6 months and really been seeing a lot of generative AI usage where people are using it to speed up their workflow, while also recognizing in my research the ways that they know things that ChatGPT doesn't know, specifics about the business and things like that, particular sensitivities. And so again, that's where I'm seeing ChatGPT integrated into a writing process rather than the product. But then also, I'm also concerned about the ways that students may be relying on generative AI to do things that are higher up on Bloom's taxonomy. So you can see in the slide a chart from Anthropic, which is a maker of a generative AI tool. And they did a very large study where they classified the requests to their generative AI according to Bloom's taxonomy. And they, as you can see, you can see a lot of it creating and analyzing. And so they say like this raises concerns about if students are outsourcing their thinking and what the implications of this will be.
Okay, and with that, we want to thank everyone for participating in the webinar, and we're open to questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Breuch. For those of you attending, we're chatting with Professor Breuch, professor in the Department of Writing Studies at the University of Minnesota, and also Associate Dean for Undergraduate Education in the College of Liberal Arts, and her research group, Stuart Dietz, Asmita Gimire, Allison Albright, Jessica Remchek, and Kathleen Bolander. Thank you all very much for your time and for the great presentation. For those in attendance, if you have questions, feel free to enter those in the Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Some of you have already submitted questions, and I'll moderate these. So, if you have other questions, feel free to put them in, and I'll see them in real time. So the first question, I'll read it kind of verbatim because it includes some accolades. This is great presentation. You mentioned using AI to help facilitate the writing process, including assisting in developing outlines for written works. Writing is thinking, and a big part of that mental exercise is developing a structure for your paper and arguments. Do you worry that using AI to facilitate this process in some way takes away from the experience students gain through developing written structures and where and how to place their arguments?
Yes. 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 So part of, I think, the tension that we see is students, when they have access to these tools, the question is, do we allow these tools or do we not allow these tools as part of the writing process? And for me, and others can chime in here, the critical AI literacy is really, really important to understand that the tools can do these things, but they do have limitations. And one insight that I would offer just from the study, if you remember, we had the first impressions from students. Students' first impressions of ChatGPT as a tool were very positive. Like, it's so fast, look what it can do, it's doing this so quickly. But when we had them read the output of ChatGPT, they had a lot more questions, and they realized some of the information may not be accurate, and maybe it wasn't in a voice that they liked, or they would add different information. And so upon a closer look, students were almost, they were more unsatisfied than they were at first blush. And sometimes student comments also said that they were very generic texts. I think applying a critical AI literacy is really important if generative AI is allowed, or encouraging students to keep that critical frame, and others may have other comments as well.
I want to add to that. Thank you so much for the question. When you say writing is thinking, it really brings back the conversation on all rewriting studies. Process advocator who tells us that one of the threshold concept of writing is thinking. So when we are outsourcing entire thinking process to the ChatGPT, it means we are not allowing a student to think at all. Therefore, as we shared in our slide, that process is important than the product. We are a strong advocate of process pedagogy.
Thank you very much. So just, I think in the interest of time, there's a few other questions, so I'll keep going here. And if any of you want to weigh in on previous questions, feel free. So the next question is, do any of you have experience grading with AI? And if so, what are your thoughts on that?
I do not, but I don't know if any of the other panelists.
Also don't. I see like my comments being from me as an opportunity to connect with students, and I don't trust the AI enough to know what I know. Perhaps that's me being egotistical and selfish, but I haven't used it.
Yeah, I haven't used it either. I haven't even thought about that. That's an interesting question, but I agree with Allison. I feel like it is a connection with your student. It is, I want to look at their work and I want to see what they're doing. And I feel like context is so huge in writing that I wouldn't trust AI to be able to give good feedback.
I haven't used it either, but I definitely agree with all of that. And I also really like to leave handwritten things if I can. I'll leave little transcriptions too, because I'm left-handed, so handwritten sometimes doesn't work for me well. But I definitely like to make that connection with my students in the feedback, and like show a little bit more of me for them, to so that I'm reading their work and appreciating, the time that they put into it. So I think that would, for me, would feel a little weird having AI like replace that part of myself that I really like to give in those moments with them. But I'd be curious to hear how it's used for sure.
So thank you very much. So we'll keep going here, I guess. Do you think there's a difference between a human writing first and then applying AI, as opposed to asking AI to generate writing to be edited by a human writer? In other words, what if you start with a human, is the product sort of better, or is there a functional difference, or is that two sides of the same coin?
Others may have a response to this. It makes me think about the chat bot part of it. So in our study, we, and this is maybe just a reflection of 2023, we put a prompt in, and there's a lot of discussion at that time about prompts and prompt management. But really, it's a chat bot. So getting into a dialogue with ChatGPT is different, whether you put a bunch of text there or you're just asking it questions. And so it can refine text in different ways depending on how you're using it. That's just my first thought. And I guess I see it more as a bot that I ask questions and have a dialogue with, rather than enter a whole text and then see what happens after that. But of course, there's multiple use cases, and others may have more to say.
Okay.
The,
Go ahead, please.
the question of who is going to be first when working with AI is really interesting. Is that a human being who is going to write first, or is that a AI who is going to produce the text first? I'm really on the side of asking human beings to write first, like the really brainstorming process when we want to give agency to students and to the real human out there.
So I'll paraphrase the next question. So how do you sort of force that process in some sense, or how do we reinforce that process? So the question is, do you do more in-class written work to prevent the use of AI on certain activities? Is that one of the practices that you take on in your department?
Moving to in-class, right? I mean, that's a really interesting suggestion and thought. And yes, there may be more in class, but also more talking about writing in class, so that students are generating ideas in the class discussion and thinking about their writing in that real-time classroom. And others may have more to say on that.
I think the metacognitive process too of having students reflect on their own process, and not only can like reveal or perhaps make them feel hesitant to use like AI tools because they know they're going to have to explain how they came up with the stuff they did, and also reinforces that that's an important part of like the learning and growth process when you're learning something new through writing. So that's been another strategy, is like end of project reflections or reflecting sometimes even just out loud in the classroom, like Leanne said.
I think too, if people do use ChatGPT or a generative AI tool, it is evaluating that text or having some kind of critical activity, whether it's a reflection or an evaluation, an actual evaluation of that text, can be a very useful activity. And we've seen a lot of that happen in writing classrooms.
Okay, thank you. So we're getting a little bit short on time, but let me see if I can ask this question for at least a brief answer from your perspective. So the background of the question is that, for instance, UT Austin has created a course called Essentials of AI for Life and Society that's called A Gentle Introduction to AI. And some of the videos are on YouTube. So the question for you is, how important do you think it is that we have more interdisciplinary discussions regarding AI? Is this something that would be useful? Should our university adopt similar coursework that allows students from all backgrounds to get together and discuss and better understand this? Is it a truly kind of interdisciplinary topic that maybe requires a refocus at the university level?
Yes. Yeah. And we have given a lot of different talks, and one of them was to the mechanical engineering department, where we were talking with a lot of instructors there and found some different impressions based on, if you remember, that circumstance filter, like on circumstances and different situations for writing. So absolutely, this is affects all disciplines, and having more interactions and discussions about it is a great idea. And Stuart,
yeah, I think it's also critical because it's not just chatbots. I think we're going to see an explosion of the usage of AI, the architecture undergirding the chatbots. That architecture is going to be used for a lot of other things in biology, in chemistry, in physics, in economics, in a lot of other places. So I think it's critical to understand the architecture that underlies it, and how that can feed into improved decision making or not. But understanding the architecture that's underneath it, I think, is going to be critical.
All right, thank you very much. So I think we're at 1 o'clock, and in order to try to respect everyone's schedules, we can adjourn here if there's any final comments from the presenters. But if not, feel free to throw your applause hands in the chat or in the screen. Thank you very much to our presenters. We really appreciate their time and their insights.
And thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.